You're listening to Conversations with Chanda, a podcast that unpacks the community's grittiest, most vexing problems, hosted by Chanda Smith Baker.
There is a rampant occurrence of 50-year-old Black men dying suddenly. And it is, and if not dying, like dramatic, horrific physical, health-related things. And I think it's been brought home for us with my brother, who is 52 years old, who suffered a massive kidney and liver failure. Another very close friend of his who suffered a stroke at 50 or 49 years old. Another good friend of his, Charles Crutchfield, Chris Crutchfield, 54 years old. It goes on and on and on. And it's a real thing. And it's been interesting. Another thing we can talk, we just finished a project where we were looking at designing a Black women's breast health destination. But inside of that was really redefining this idea of breast health versus breast cancer prevention. And one of the things that has been very interesting for us is the way that women are exploring health versus the way the men are exploring health. And
can you say more about that? I know that, it's all about exploring all of the topics, and we'll get to where we want to go to, but I feel like this is so important. So what did you learn about the difference between how women are exploring their health and men?
And let me say, for me, one of the things I was often the only man in the room, so I was asking really stupid questions, So sometimes I just was saying, that being in the room and never having a uterus kind of gave me like some, you know what I mean? It was like a different kind of questioning. And one of the things that we realized was that women and an active relationship around their body and health starts much earlier. And it's different with men. I mean, I was kind of joking that simultaneously I was talking with men, and our relationship to healthcare is, let me phrase it, because that's the thing we're saying, our relationship to healthcare, right? Began, if you played sports, you're beginning, you got a beginning. If you didn't play sports, you didn't really get one, right? So you may not, the only doctor you might see is a dentist. But if you played sports, the introduction was a doctor grabbed your testicles, asked you to cough, and then sent you down the hallway. That was you
have to do your annual physicals to get cleared to play. Yeah.
To get cleared to play. And it wasn't a physical, right? And it wasn't relational. There was no conversation. There was nothing about stage of development. There was nothing, there was nothing there.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. It was, can I play football, or can I play basketball, or can I play whatever or not?
That's it. Mm-hmm. And when we were working with the women, and we have a really kind of cool chart that the Cultural Wellness Center uses about age, stage of development, and where we were asking women about what was happening relative to their healthcare relationship, healthcare life in each of those stages, and what did they need to know, which was really kind of an interesting question. But what we found was that women were having a beginning of a relationship to healthcare, to their bodies, and a deeper conversation simply with the menstrual cycle. Like at minimum, there was that. And that could be starting from women as early as 10. There's and one of the things that came out of it when we asked the question, what were you told, right? How was that initiated? Versus now, and looking back, what did you need to know?
Yeah.
And that has turned into a really beautiful line of conversation, because we also had women at different age stages. So we were in the room with 80 to 100 women. Some were, we kind of chose to have 20 to 28, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 60 to 70. And then we had over 70-year-olds in the room as well.
And now you're seeing a movement around menopause and other things that definitely were not socialized to the level that they are right now. The conversation is so necessary. And what sort of caught my attention is you talking about Chris Crutchfield, who just passed away at a young age. I know his daughter. She's my line sister. But I was also at Justin Frank's funeral, 42 years old, who had a stroke. And
right.
George Robinson, who is my uncle through marriage, who I love very dearly, that had a very quick bout with cancer, about 5 weeks, 6 weeks. And what has been sitting with me, or all of the stressors that are sitting underneath us as we're doing our work. And I've been in 2 meetings in the last couple of days where the question is, how are you feeling in your body? You know, what are you feeling? And it starts out in a political conversation. Very quickly, it goes to, and this person died, or this person is battling this issue, or I'm struggling to care for someone in my family as I'm trying to do my work. And I think it's interesting that in this most unpredictable way, we started out this conversation, because I think that the conversation is very much around health, individual health and connection. How do we address isolation? How do we build community? What does health of community look like? And I don't see them as being as separate as sometimes we talk about them. So I'm wondering what you all think about that.
I do also want to acknowledge my close relationship with Chris and the work that he and I and Michael Belton have done since he took the position at Ujamaa. Ujamaa, it was started by and for men of African descent, Black men, who were actually in prison for many years and were being released and looking for, and they really developed quite a path moving back into the community. The Black men who had been in prison for quite some time in many, many cases, weren't coming out into a community who really had the kind of wherewithal to receive them in a way that it would build their skills and build their competence and build their faith and rebuild their sense of worth. So that's what Ujamaa was really doing, is investing in that, and has been and continues to do, and is investing in that re-entry process for Black men. So I want to acknowledge, first of all, him, Chris, and the thinking that he was doing when he took the position. And so his I forced this question about self-study, which is lots of people think of it as blame and shame yourself. But what we have been able to do is talk about self-study. And so we do both cultural self-study and personal self-study. And my work with Chris was with him looking at the physical manifestation of the deep, deep concern that he had for our people, and the way that manifests itself in your body, and the way it manifests itself in your relationships, and the way you feel yourself responsible, for example, for his brother and for others, in his family, who his mother, all of those, he had a sense of responsibility to people who he loved, and those he loved expanded into all Black people.
The other question that came up, and I think that it will also flow nicely into describing the vision that you're laying out, is one where you said sort of the responsibility of caring for himself and his family, that extension in the community, the people that work there, into Black community. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, because we have a lot of organizations that are finally very focused on hiring BIPOC folks, right? And I say that because that's their language. That is not my language. I do not like, I'm not a BIPOC type, but that is the language, right? They want to hire a BIPOC. And so I say that to say that there is such value in having people be in positions to diversify and to improve your business and the outcomes of your business, right? Just having a diverse set of experiences and people and perspectives, when properly leveraged, it supports business. In the work that we do in community, right? The closer you sort of get to the issue, the better the solutions are. And so there's a real value to that. What I don't think we talk about is the weight of that. And
Yes.
I have led many diverse teams, and I have been in many situations myself, right? The tornado hits the north side,
Yep.
and it also hit my house. So I'm
Yes.
leading the work, and I'm also trying to
Yep.
get my roof fixed at the same
That's
time
right.
for the same event, right? Sometimes I'm at table and they're talking about, Black kids on the north side and their poor parents and all this stuff. Well, I am a parent on the north side with kids that go to the schools over here. So it's a very interesting sort of, there is no distance between me and the problem in many cases. And so when the problems come up, they're so deeply personal that the weight of carrying that is very different than someone who does not have
That's right.
that relationship with it. And I would love it if the two of you could just talk a little bit about it, because it's feeling really heavy for people in this moment, because they're identifying with where they think their rights might be shifting, or the things that
Right.
that they are, their hope has dissipated in some ways. And so I just want to talk about the weight of what leadership is, and maybe some of the work that you have done. If you could describe that, and then we'll go into where you're going. But what have you done relative to this work?
Well, I'll start, Anthony, and then I would love for you to come in and talk a little bit more about this whole concept of weathering. Because, it has become a thing to really write about, think about, and teach about weathering and that whole impact. The Cultural Wellness Center really is what I consider I dedicate the Cultural Wellness Center to the path of survival and resiliency of Black people who are in my 80-year age range. And that resiliency that we inherited and that we also have begun to practice is challenged constantly with me because of my objection to what is called retirement. And so it's tied to this idea that survival for us was ritualistic. In other words, on a day by day, moment by moment basis, there were things that we did to infuse and to rebuild and restore faith, number one, and to rebuild and restore confidence, number two, that we are going to get through this. And there were things that I think that now have become almost like popularized as something other than culture. In my case, I was born in 1943 in Mississippi, in the Delta where the blues was born. And I realized that in the Delta where the blues was born, you know what the blues came from? From the pain, the suffering, and the capacity to build what we know as song and humming and all those different things. You connect that with your physical ability, and when you connect the music, the sound that comes from the creator and all those different, you connect all those things together, and what you get is resiliency. But in the majority of cases, resiliency has now also become objectified. In other words, people talk about it and think about it, that resiliency is taking the struggle and suffering and acting like it doesn't hurt. And that you will get up in the morning and pretend like there is nothing going on. And you certainly won't talk about it. So I think that what our people did, what we have done, and I would say our people in this case, I'm talking about the old people. And of course, Anthony hears me do this, but I go back to the stories that the sisters and brothers and sisters in particular always talk about, the incidents of life. And there's even a book that's called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And those were the things that we knew about and we experienced. But guess what? The talking about it was a different kind of talking. So it wasn't like revealing everything that had happened, but it was revealing what we see as we're going to make it through, kind of that I'm going to make it through no matter what's happened to me. I imagine there to be a heaven kind of thing. So that was the way we talked about it. But the reason that I want to just say that, and then I'll stop, is that we as Black people have suffered tremendous. What has been done is experimentation on our capacity to endure levels of pain. And some of it was very, very intentional. So I always recommend people read Medical Apartheid. Today, I ask Black women to buy the Policing the Wound document that Michelle Goodwin has written. Because what you're going to be able to see is the experimentation on Black women in particular and Black men also. This experimentation of how much pain and suffering, the medical experimentation on us, is not talked about in terms of how we endure. Much of the time is what we talk about is how hard we worked and how much we were brutalized, but not about the experimentation of all kinds of things on our every organ in our bodies, every place in our body that might look like it could endure and last for a long time. Those kind of experiments were done. So what I'm saying is, when we talk about resiliency right now, it includes being knowledgeable about what is it that our enduring qualities included. It included knowing about the organs in the body, but not in an objectified way. But we knew the heart, if the heart was heavy. This is an example. If the heart was heavy, if you slept with the heart being heavy, if you did not experiment with how much you experimented how much you could endure and at what point you had to break down, but not break down in the physical way, but break down in the spiritual way and come on in and give it over to the forces in creation that was going to carry you through it. That's the dedication of the Cultural Wellness Center, to memorialize that capacity of us and our people to endure at the level of the soul and to be informed by the connection that we had to the soul, the voice of the soul, and to every single moment of every single day have the capacity to give in and give over and give up to that which is beyond our physical presence, and the fact that any other human being can really kill us. So even our medical stuff is that we go and we listen to the doctor and we take what they say and then we come home and test what we know.
Well, yeah,
And
that's
so
for sure.
those things to me.
Don't tell nobody about their baby either, because your grandma gonna come in and tell them, give that baby some sugar water and some.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Those were all experiments that were alongside the other experiments that were brutal and awful, and yet here we are today. So I believe we have a capacity and an endurance and a ritualizing of resiliency that we haven't yet talked about, which is what we want to do in the Cultural Wellness Center.
Yeah, I think that a couple of things that just hopefully bridges and ties, and then Anthony, I'm going to bring you in to this conversation, which is because of the ways that the medical field ignored or experimented, it is create narratives about how we interact with our health is sort of where we started in some ways.
Yes.
And it certainly shows up in different ways. It showed up around the pandemic. They're not going to be experimenting again on me. We don't know, right? You can hear the language throughout the generations being moved
Yes.
with a rightful and understandable cautiousness.
Yes.
Right. And so we have the weight of what the world has done. We have the weight of the world and its impact on our community and how we lean into that or not in terms of our own leadership. And then we have the navigating the world and the skin we're in, right, all sort of coming together. And again, Anthony, the conversation really is about when you're in the work and you are the work, right, at the same time. Like,
yes.
I think that, there has to be opportunities for repair and deep understanding for us to sort of manage the navigation of all of that. I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
So one of the concepts of that really is just, I'll say, in terms of work that my mother has done. One of the things they did, Chanda, that was really interesting is they got the state of Minnesota to change the definition of health, and they came up with this idea that connectedness, in some ways, is the ultimate measure of health, right? And so one of the things for us in terms of, the way we are always in community, like being in community is foundational for us in terms of our well-being. And sometimes when we're doing the work, right, and it is work in our community, one of our responses to that sometimes is to isolate. Like, you know what I mean? It's like it becomes this response, and that then actually doesn't support our health, right? It doesn't actually support, your ability to continue to do the work, because that's really the thing that happens. We have to have a conscious and intentional strategy, right, to balance what we know is happening in our lives. And I think sometimes, we don't always do that, and that the suffering itself becomes
Yeah.
the actual result of the work. Like that's the reward. You know what I mean? It's like people go, I don't know how you do it. So it becomes the reward almost, like in an odd way,
Yes.
versus, the positive outcomes that we really want. And so then we normalize, so then the suffering itself becomes normalized because we internalize it. It becomes part of the kind of what we see as the character of the community. Even as we try to do the work, we kind of do this thing where we talk about the character of the community in that way. And I think even and even your first conversation about people talking about the North Side, right? And those kids on the North Side, and again, we're sitting there and they're talking about us, and they're talking about our people, and like we can't respond. Like there's a part of you that can go, you can't, you know what I mean? You can't be in that meeting about those things and do that. And so I think that really winds up being part of it. And again, the idea of us actually visualizing a vital, vibrant, Black life becomes harder to imagine. You know what I mean?
The other way that it manifests is when people talk about they're too busy to take a vacation because there's so much work to have to be done.
Right.
And I'm like, we've centered ourselves as the hero in the story to the extent that we feel like we are not owed a break. That if we take a break, like that's the weight of it. It's coming from a love of community, but we have to find ways for us to repair and find time to ourselves, reflect, get to the balcony, deal with the things that we need to deal with in our lives. And I think that it's an incredibly hard thing to find the right balance. And I just hope that folks that are listening that are thinking through these issues, either for their staff, for their families, for themselves, that they find places like the Cultural Wellness Center and other places where they can build a community around who they are, not what they do. And
Yes.
where they can
Yes.
feel and find community that is concerned about how are you really, how are you in your body? Are you going to the doctor? Are you doing the things that you need to do so that you can continue to do the work that I know you care so much about? So that is my hope, that people are being more aware of in this moment.
She's many people's mothers, which is really, always, and you all grew up in that. We share our mothers with many, many people. But yeah, she is the founder of the Cultural Wellness Center. And I think I get to do lots of interesting work. And in many, many days, I point to the fact, well, this was the house I grew up in. Really built the Cultural Wellness Center from really a perspective of really a foundational love of Black people. And they really, I think that she and many people in the Twin Cities, I think we all, they're a community of people who built around a Sealy, for those of you that remember that, or owners remember that.
I was part of that, by the way. I used to go on Saturday mornings.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I did. Mahmoud, I was over at Oak Park.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I think this idea of this group of elders, and it's interesting to say you were influenced by that, as someone who's not, our brother Rapaz influenced by that. There's a network of Black leaders that I see that came from that particular moment that have a very clear, they really do love Black people, and they also love Black thought. And they also have a very clear connection to this idea of an African-centered worldview that is actually really interesting. And I think that, a lot of the work that I think that that comes out of the Cultural Wellness Center, what I think they take most pride in is that it is a system that really engages all people, improving all life, that is grounded in an African way of seeing the world, that is looking at a set of African principles related to health and community and building and the future and time and what development is. Like all of these ideas, there's a very particular perspective of how that looks from the place of an African grounded in an African-centered perspective that then shows up in the work. And I think that, that really is, it really is quite amazing. And I think we're in that moment where that idea is really important. And I am with you. I am in the, I don't like BIPOC club. I am with you 100%. And part of it is that idea that often when we as Black leaders show up, there's a way where we're not able to clearly articulate the ground that we stand on, right, as Black people in this country of African descent. And that in all that means, and again, it just kind of, how do we de-racialize that conversation so we can look at our culture and what it brings and the way that it is influenced everything that we live today. And I will say, this is my mother, and I grew up in that house. That was like
I got it. And Mother Atum, who is Anthony?
Anthony, anybody who knows you, Anthony, know that he reads everything all the time. His intelligence in terms of the intellect, the memory that you have, Anthony, started a long time ago. I remember when Anthony would developed, kind of this capacity for words to kind of become the kind of game that he might play. What are these words and what do they really mean and who else uses them? And this whole thing around the intellect and how that was his escape from many of the things that he might have been up against that he had no control over. But what he did have control over was his mastery and mind.
So folks that are listening and those that are in the Twin Cities will be like, he's the naturist that be taking us out on the bikes and down the slopes and all of that stuff, and certainly has done a lot of work around getting more brown and Black people utilizing the resources in our city. But I also know him as a historian. So as we talk about the vision for Dreamland, I think it's important if we can just take a few minutes to sort of center on the community in which you're building of Green Central, this sort of mecca in many ways for middle-class Black families as they were moving in there. My dad was born in that neighborhood. My grandmother lived there. Green Central is named after my Uncle Richard Green. I went to many places in that neighborhood as a child. And so it's deeply personal, and it communicates in my body so much joy and happiness. And so it was incredibly painful when George Floyd lost his life there in the way that he did. And we know that he was not the first Black man to lose his life at the hands of police or the hands of other folks in that neighborhood. And so there's some pain that exists there as well. But it became incredibly painful and so many things came up. But I'd love it if you could just share a little bit of your history, the way that you see the history of that place.
Yeah, I love South Minneapolis for many reasons. And when I first moved here to go to University of Minnesota, my mother had a very best friend from Grenada, Mississippi, who lived on 39th and 12th Avenue South. And so I kind of got some roots there. But I then got absorbed by what Black families did. There was a time when you moved to a city, and of course you were introduced to a Black family. They took you in and connected you into that network. And the Twin Cities Black family communities were very, very, very connected. South Minneapolis was special in that in the 1930s, really pre what we think about as redlining, there were some racial covenants happening, but the Black community really localized itself right along 4th Avenue. And in 1937, a refugee from the Tulsa riots who had moved to Minnesota, escaping from there, and came here as a 13-year-old with his younger brother. and started working in downtown Minneapolis in the hotels, and ultimately became a union organizer, opened a business called the Dreamland Cafe. And he opened in 1937 on 38th and 4th. And in his autobiography, when he talks about it, he says he opened it so that those young hotheads could have a place to conspire for the cost of a soda. And so, and in the interviews that I've seen, he's talking about a social impact business, right? Or a business that he wasn't starting the business because he wanted to be in the soda business, right? He knew that's what it was. And so the Dreamland Cafe opened really actually as the first integrated liquor license in the Twin Cities. Anthony B. Cassius was his name. He lived there for many years, went on to open another famous spot on the South Side, which was the Nakarima Club. And the Nakarima Club just down the block was a place that really excitingly was a club. And I think the other thing that was really, it was a social club. It was a place that he cultivated Black music. But I think all of these things, and I think something we don't really think about, is these are institutions in many regards, like all the Black institutions that were cropping up on the South Side, including the Masons, including the churches. Most people don't know the first Black church in Minnesota was actually founded on the South Side. Right. And that was really important. But they were building institutions that validated Black humanity. That the other
was that the AME church? What?
Yeah, exactly. Over on Snelling now is where it is on Snelling. The spokesman recorder comes up on the South Side, and this is like 1939. So there's this period of these institutions popping up around 1940 that is exactly the same time that redlining emerges. And what everyone really is, we talk about redlining, has to realize that redlining only begins as we know it because of the federal housing insurance program, because the ability to insure a mortgage by the federal government allows them to then rate these communities in terms of their worthiness for an insured loan. And what they do is they create a pathology of talking about it. And I mean, you have to read these documents that they write because they are talking the fact, they are saying that the presence of Black people degrades the value of the community. And I mean, it's shocking to read it when they talk about it, but that's how they talk about it. And at the same time, what happens, of course, is Black people together, right, is vital. Like that the businesses are vital because they're supported in meeting the needs of Black communities. And one of the phrases essentially we talk about when we think about business development from a cultural perspective, the cultural wellness center perspective, a phrase we use is talking about cultural insulation, right? And that is thinking about this idea of when a business is growing, culturally grounded business are serving the needs of a particular cultural community. So when these were businesses were designed to meet our particular tastes in groceries, hair and barbershop, our tastes in music, our tastes in clothes. And so they were selling to the people who live in community. And the general market doesn't compete with that. Like the versions of that exist today is when a Latino or Latina business opens, they're meeting the cultural needs from a food or a clothing perspective based on their cultural identity, and they're not competing with the general market. So they grow and they thrive, and then they can make a decision to become general market. And Black-owned businesses did that for years. And that's one of the things that happens. Those communities also are exciting because the people who are doing, which you just mentioned earlier about doing the work, the Lena O. Smiths, right? The first Black, woman attorney in Minnesota. It lives on the South Side, down the street. The Pullman porters who were moving, they lived on the South Side and traveled, and we were building the schools. Yeah. And so there's this way where all of these institutions, grounded in validating Black humanity, actually are also creating an economic reality that is serving the community and building really vitality, even in the midst of what's being described as a devalued pathology based on the presence of those people. And that is what happens all the way until basically the 80s, in South Minneapolis until we begin to see this actual assault on the community relative to other institutions. And one of the first ones is schools.
Hmm. In your words, you painted such vibrancy and community and innovation and acumen. There was a lot in that story, and the history runs deep for those families that sort of lived together in those moments, right? I was with Tanya Hampton, who just wrote a book, and her grandparents started the Spokesman Recorder, and we are always saying, like, we're friends, but we've been family for a long time because of those connections. And so here we go, where there was some assaults on the community. It begins to look and form a little bit differently. It feels like what you're envisioning in your plan is a little bit like going back to the future. Is it taking what's good and moving it forward? Like, how would you describe what you are defining as this Dreamland project?
And I think Dreamland, the idea of we are leaning very heavily back to this 1937, right? The acknowledgement of this, what happens on 38th and 4th in 1937, and leaning on that. But also the business and the way that we're really building it, and we'll, it'd be great to see pictures, is that we are building the building so that it has a physical connection to Sabanthony, to 38th and 4th, and ultimately to George Floyd Square. That there's a way where we're saying that this corridor has a legacy of culture and liberation, and that this moment that we talk about in terms of George Floyd's murder and George Floyd Square, that is just the latest of expression for Black liberation in this community, and that has been a constant. Right? It's been a constant in all of those things that have been expressed there. And so we really are trying to build the Dreamland on 38th, which will be the new world headquarters for the Cultural Wellness Center. But the activities themselves are designed to invite people in and to have this cultural, historical exploration of yourself. Right. And to actually literally be able to do it. And that's one of the things that we really find that there is a spark in African-American people to have a deeper understanding of our past.
Yeah. So Anthony, like, can you contextualize that? So does it mean that I can come in and trace back to my great grandfather? Like, that's not easy for some people. Is that the type of thing that you'll be doing there?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And through relationship. And I think that, it's a mix of actual holding paper and pen in your hand and using technology. So we really envision the ability. One, we're looking at a partnership with the Minnesota Historical Society. And I will tell you, every Black person in Minnesota needs to go to the Minnesota Historical Society, because Europeans documented everything. And your people are in there too. I mean, Chanda, I have been amazed at the photographic archives and how much Black life is held in those archives. It is amazing. And secondly, that they documented the stories. Mm. So there is the ability for us to do that look back. The other thing that we're linking to is the National Network of African American Museums through technology. Because again, we don't think about it, but we all were part of a migration, right? Our roots are in Mississippi. Our roots are in Alabama and Arkansas, Tennessee, Texas, right? And Minnesota for sure, because our population has grown very slowly over the years. In 1960, it was less than 4%. You know what I mean? And so it really isn't that long. So we really do have the ability to do that. And so we want people to do it and trace it through story. The other amazing documentation of Black life is Black newspapers. It is really an overlooked, documentation of Black life. And that was really why they existed, right? So the pictures of graduations, deacon and usher boards, weddings, funerals, births, you know what I mean? Store openings.
Debutante balls.
I mean, this amazing. And so, so for us to, for someone to come in, be able to come in, our goal, you'll be able to come in and really sit down and really do that, have a single place where you can get guidance and do that legwork, and you start piecing it
Yes.
together.
Yes.
And that can happen. And additionally, the part that I laugh about is my mother, who, you know her, she's talking about 23andMe. And so that, that there's this marriage that, again, you do this linkage if you do a 23andMe.
Why is that important, though? Why is this important?
Well, 23andMe. So this idea for us is to work with the Minnesota Historical Society and this ancestor chart that they have a form and a format for looking at the ancestor chart. Those of us who have even tried to do pieces of it, it's very, very painful. So what we want to do is to hold the hand of people who go through the ancestor chart. What we will have is the elder and the hand-holding side of that, where family members can do family reunions. And we will have the space for providing the family reunion in the fashion that people are used to, where you have really good food, you have a lot of laughing and enjoying that family reunion and reconnecting with someone who you haven't seen for a really long time. But all of that then becomes the ancestry charting that we will do with you, as opposed to it being sending you off somewhere to do the chart. So that's why it's important, is because the pain and the struggle that we have right now, in many cases, is because we know that we have lived on the planet for a long time. But because the part of racism that we haven't looked at is the disconnection, the purposeful, intentional, disconnected kind of force that was placed within us. And so now this reconnection is going to require us to be together with each other in ways and in places where our hands are being held and our hearts, are being opened, and that we can do that within our own space.
I think about student assignments, right? Tell us where your grandparents came from. And, kids coming home and they're like, I don't know where my great grandparents, and I was in this board meeting, and I tell this story a lot because I was so embarrassed, and I also wasn't embarrassed, but because I cried through the whole meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was feeling all kinds of stress. So there was many reasons why I was crying, but I was down in Albuquerque. And I came in and I was late, and there was this whole thing about me trying to get there. So just imagine just the pressure of trying to be somewhere and all of that kind of stuff. And I was, and the reason I was late is because I was dealing with something that didn't go right in the organization I was running at the time, and trying to get it over to the board, and I'm trying to get to this, right? So that was the spirit I was coming in with. And I walk in and they were smudging.
Yes.
And they were saying, they were really coming up from some ancestral places. And we had to go around the table and talk about who we are and where we came from and talk about where you originated from.
Yes.
And so there were 2 Black people in the room. And so I was the second one to speak. And the first one goes, well, y'all know you took that from us. I can't even answer this question, right? So by the time they get to me, I'm like, Kleenex everywhere. Because in the moment, and I had some things I was carrying from my mother who didn't get to, know her ancestors and her background well for many reasons, including boarding schools and some other things that were at play. And so I say that to say that there are people that can't find it because they don't know how to find it. They don't have the technical ability. I think that the pain that we carry from not having access, it impacts our identity. It impacts positive self-identity is a really important thing. And it's hard to have when you can't grab a hold of it, when you can't sense make. Some of this is about sense making, right? And dealing with, I had no idea. I'm like, I don't even know I'm crying, right? They kept like, what's wrong with you? I don't know what's wrong with me, but I don't want to move away from the table. So if y'all can please just deal with my sniffles and just let me just get it out my body. I don't understand it, but my body understood it. And I think
Yes.
this whole conversation is about, what we're holding. And I think that there's not space that can hold what we're holding. And I think what you're talking about is creating an extension of the vision that you have had to a bigger, maybe more focused, more expanded container to hold the dreams and the pain
That's
and
correct.
the opportunity of Black community, and centering it in a place that was a mecca.
That's right.
Right? That was a daily demonstration of the genius of Black people in this community, the
That's correct.
entrepreneurship, all of that. We want to be able to channel the wisdom, the legacy, what is in the
Yep.
DNA of those neighborhoods, those blocks, those houses. You want to bring it
Yes.
together into a space. And so what do you need to do that? Like, where are you at in that process?
I'm going to let Anthony go with this, but first I want to say to you that what you just described is my story. It is the story that forced me to take a look at my father and my mother in particular. I mean, my father in particular, but both my father and my mother. And it was when I saw my father, tall, big hand, big feet, Black man. Neither of them had been in school. My mother, not at all. My father, through the fifth grade or so. But the thing about my father that left me really being forced to know who we are was because I saw a white man spit on him. And I saw my father turn, and because he took me different places, and because he was so tall, he would put his hand on top of my head as opposed to holding my hand like many regular people do. He put his hand on top of my head and would turn, and that's how we walked. And this day, this man spit on him in his face. My father took his hand, put it on top of my head, took me to his truck, and was doing this kind of sound that was often heard in the church when you go, that sound? He was making that sound. And at the same time, guided me with his hand on top of my head. And I, on that day, said, this man who spit on him, I know who he is. Even at that early age, I knew that hate that was inside that man was the opposite of what my father had inside of him. I needed to know what it was my father had inside of him, what gave him the capacity to steer me in the way he did, to protect me just by being able to show humanity at that moment and not hate. And he never showed a sign of hate in all the many, many years that I saw him and knew him. First of all, resurrecting who we are, and then going through the process of knowing who we are, not necessarily guided by technology, but by talking, listening, holding each other's hand. I just needed to say that because your story is very powerful, the same as mine, which is why we need a space where we can do that together.
Yeah, and I think that's important because there's some places that you walk into and it's for you. And it's very hard to explain, but I think if anybody listening, you will know when your spirit lands in a place that it's being received in, whether or not it's a familiar smell, whether or not it's the way it's decorated, whether or not it's a familiar face or whatever. And we don't have enough of those spaces in the Twin Cities. I'm going to say one more story because I think it's important to sort of communicate what it looks like. And this is going to be quick, but over at North High, my sons were there after George Floyd's murder, and they had a gathering in the auditorium. And I didn't know what it was going to be, and I didn't know how heavy it was going to be. But what the principal, the Amari, said to them in summary was, this is hard, right? This is hard. We are going through some hard times, but I want you to be absolutely clear that no matter what the narrative is about you, you are from greatness. You are from survivors. Do you know what we went through? Do you know what your ancestors went through so you can be here? Do you know what they had to survive on that journey? Do you know what they had to survive on those fields? And I think that it's really, really important that because so much of the framing about Black community is seeped in what's not working and in despair and in disparity, that it becomes an internalized narrative
That's correct.
that needs to be disrupted. And so I think and can really deeply appreciate the disruptive nature, which shouldn't actually be a radical act of knowing where you came from. That shouldn't be actually disruptive and radical, but apparently it is. It shouldn't not be accessible, but obviously it is. And you all are building out this space. And so as we get ready to conclude, I just want to talk about what phase you are in building this dream. And if people wanted to know more about it, where would they go?
Yeah, we're our plan right now is to break ground in the spring of 25. We are we're in capital campaign mode. We are actually at about over $7 million raised, and our goal is about 11.2. And we are excited to say that we have made a commitment. We're moving forward. We are working on what that looks like. One of the elements of the work that we're excited about, and we want to have a community investment element to the work that we do. I think that was one of the elements we started early on, was that we are going to build this building, and we really want to be really, I think in some ways, a Black-led institution in the Black community. That a significant element of what got us there was Black community participation. So that is the last phase that we're in right now, looking at community investment models that allow us to make that happen. Because we really do, not only do we want it to be a place where you come and you belong, but we also want to make it from the fact that we got here, that you really know that it belongs to you, right? That you had a role in making it happen. And I think that really is important for us as well, because I think that really, we really do need to be able to look at institutions that we built, and that's really where we are at that. So this fall, for this next year, we will be doing a lot of things in community on a timeline leading to groundbreaking that really acknowledges this. And we really hope to honor a lot of really the new leadership. Something we are committed to is that idea. And honestly, you are a part of that. We are standing in a moment right now that is absolutely amazing. That the leadership, where people are, you know what I mean? That this is our moment because of the type of Black leader that is rising right now. And we need to ground the support of community behind them. That is where we are now. And we really see this groundbreaking and this final commitment to come. That's what we want to make this next year about for us as we bring Dreamland to life.
And as you know, when we had the event, that was our launching of this particular July 18th event that we had, that was hosted by amazing, Dr. King and the amazing, of course, Phyllis Goff, but also the amazing people who were connected to them, including yourself. And one of the things that we left with our brand ambassador, T. Michael, who wanted to make it clear that we do have people like yourselves who are ambassadorial. And so we do want people whose story becomes, that's what you become an ambassador of, is this idea that we will have Black bricks. And the way we have the bricks that become a part of the building, the scenery in the building, is by the number of dedicated, commitments and contributions that our people can make. And we know you can do that. We know that we can do that. And that's where we are. So this groundbreaking is for sure. With any of the construction things that we have no control over, Those will be the only things that will stop us, because we want people to start now imagining the bricks that will be laid to make this building what it is will be Black bricks.
I love it. And when we met and we talked about it and you described it, and I'm like, is this where the ice cream shop was?
Yes.
And I have not thought about that place in a long time. But again, I just want to keep reinforcing the importance of connection, because so many things go away, but the body remembers, the mind, right? Like all of the things.
Yep.
And so instantly
Yep.
I thought about my grandfather who used to walk me down. It was a block down the street. I was very young. I don't even know when that place closed, but I was really little. But I remember, like, if I'm just good, if I just sit quiet while he's with his friends, I get to go down this street and get this ice cream. And so it wasn't just the ice cream, it was the walk down the street.
That's
It was
right.
it was a special time that I got with him that made me want that reward. And so I think that it is just fantastic. We see things like Chip Gates' thing. What is it? Roots, finding my roots.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Which is
Yep.
a television show. It's very important. Right. It gives that person something.
Yes.
But I think it's very different to sit with people that you know as you discover together, your history and the collective history.
Yes.
And so there's something like, if people understand that show, it's like that, but in community context,
Right.
with people that you're familiar with and that you know, that can be a container for the things that come up and help you navigate where you want to go after you get the information, which I think is really important. So do you all have a website? Is there a place that someone could go to if they wanted to find out more? And if so, where would that be?
It's a Cultural Wellness Center website, and it's culturalwellnesscenter.org. And so the other thing that I really want to also add to what you have said is that this is about our health and our cultural wellness. And we distinguish between history and heritage. Heritage takes us to health. And so as you think about it, this racism that it's such a source of pain. What we're saying is that culture and cultural resurrection and cultural reconnection is also a source of, health and well-being. And that's, once again, we want to keep making it clear that heritage is where we're going to now ground ourselves. History is where the pain and struggle can be placed. But the heritage is actually, right now, we have to uncover it and then build it and invest in it. And that is the way we define health. And going all the way back to way back when, we'll tell you this story some other time, where we did some research with at that time it was Mr. Professor Little, who was at Howard University. And he was one of the first people, to start this whole thing about genealogical research. And we did a conference, the first conference that a community has ever hosted, and had them come and speak to us with someone at the University of Minnesota. So sometime we'll tell you about that. So we didn't just jump into this because I wanted to know myself. We did the research to support that this heritage system that we have in place, and the infrastructure for that is what goes into this building, and we get to use that as our foundational health system.
Yeah, I love the idea of thinking about heritage and its medicinal
yes,
properties, right? Like the history that holds the pain, and
heritage. That's right.
The medicinal elements to counter pain, right? It's the aspirin to your knee ache. I get it. And hopefully you all listening to this show can have a deep appreciation for the opportunity that lies in front of us to erect a place that is built by us, for us, and a place that has been lived by many of us over generations here in our Black community. Thank you, Anthony and Mother Atum, for joining us from the Cultural Wellness Center in this conversation. Again, if you want to learn more, please go to www.culturalwellness, is it center.org?
Yes.
Cultural wellnesscenter.org to find out more information. And if you want to learn more about the campaign and the community campaign, please go there as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If you'd like to explore more content and join our community, find us at conversationswithchanda.com. We have a wonderful collection of episodes featuring notable guests that you can enjoy wherever you get your podcast.